What's going on? This is Matt the Scotian Canadian, and this is my preview for the 2018-19 Atlantic Division. This is the division that the Montreal Canadiens play in, so these are the teams that we're going to play the most throughout next season. So let's take a look at what we can expect from some of our rivals. First up is the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now this is a team that is absolutely terrifying. I am very confident in labeling them the only true Stanley Cup contender in our division. Their offense is absolutely stacked. On forward, you have Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, Andre Palat, Alex Killorn, Ryan Callahan, Tyler Johnson. The list goes on and on and on. And then on defense, you have Victor Hedman, one of the best defensemen in the league, a true #1 defenseman who is entering what should be the best years of his career. And then you have Ryan McDonagh, who they got from the Rangers last year, who you could argue is also a true #1 defenseman. Then you have Anton Stralman, a very reliable shutdown defenseman in the NHL, who can also put up some points. And then they have some young defenders that are coming up that have some very serious potential, one of them being Mikhail Sergachev, who they acquired from the Habs last year. And then in goal, they have Andrei Vasilevskiy, who's one of the best goalies in the league. He had an absolutely incredible year last year. This is a team I do not want to face in the playoffs, but I am looking forward to their games against Montreal next season, kind of as a measuring stick to see how Montreal does against one of the best teams in the league. So it should be a lot of fun, and they are one of our rivals now after a few hard-fought playoff series, both trading off wins. Next up is the Ottawa Senators. Now, we don't need to talk about them a whole lot because, quite honestly, not really worried about them at all. I see this as a team that's going to bottom out next year. They're in the midst of what you could call an epic demise right now. Quite honestly, I'm starting to feel a little bad for their fans. There's no one to blame for this demise other than their owner, Eugene Melnyk, and his errand boy, Pierre Dorion. They've made some very questionable moves these past couple seasons, and this roster is becoming depleted. They recently lost Mike Hoffman, a legitimate 30-goal scoring threat for them every season. I'm glad he's no longer on the Senators. However, he's still going to be in our division, and I'll talk about that later on. Now, the Ottawa Senators still do have Erik Karlsson, but it's kind of up in the air how long he's going to be an Ottawa Senator. So this is a team that I can't see the morale being that great, and I just see them bottoming out this season. They do have some pretty decent young players and some prospects, and they recently drafted Brady Tkachuk, who's going to be a pain in the ass for every team that plays him. But in terms of just next season, not really worried about this team at all. Now here's another team that we don't have to talk a whole lot about because they've already won the Stanley Cup for next season, so we can just move on and talk about somebody else. No, but seriously, the Leafs signed John Tavares over the summer, and that is one of the biggest UFA signings in the history of the NHL. So congratulations, Leafs fans. I have mad respect for what John Tavares did. More Canadian players need to pull up their big boy pants and come play for their favorite childhood team. I'm looking at you, Sid. The Leafs have the best center depth in the league after the Pittsburgh Penguins, with John Tavares, Austin Matthews, and then Nazem Kadri, a 30-goal scorer as your third-line center. That is incredibly impressive. And then with the wingers as Mitch Marner, William Nylander, Kapanen, Brown, they have a lot of very young, talented players. They also have veteran Patrick Marleau on the wing. That was a great signing last offseason. He is still a great offensive player. And then in goal, they have Freddie Anderson, who's an absolute stud goaltender. I'm a huge Freddie Anderson fan. I was quite disappointed to hear that he was going to the Leafs a couple years ago. But it is incredibly understated how much the Leafs have relied on Frederik Andersen the last couple seasons. I'm curious to see what he has left in the tank going into next season, because if they're to lose him, they are absolutely screwed, despite having one of the best offenses in the league. And I say that because their defense is absolute garbage. After Morgan Rielly and Jake Gardiner, the talent on their D drops off completely. Now, Morgan Rielly is a great defender and great offensive defenseman, but I wouldn't quite call him a #1 defenseman yet. Then you have Jake Gardiner, who's still somewhat inconsistent. Leafs fans know that best. He did have a decent year last year, put up good offensive numbers. And then after that, you're going with an overrated Nikita Zaitsev, an old Ron Hainsey, and then a very young Travis Dermott. This defense definitely has to improve before this team can be considered a true Stanley Cup contender. And no more skating by on low expectations. It's time this team wins a playoff round. Enough is enough. Looking forward to this rivalry for the next many years to come. It's going to be very heated and likely become one of the biggest rivalries in the NHL. And now the Boston Bruins, another heated rival for the Montreal Canadiens. As much as I personally hate this team, there's not a whole lot of bad things I can say about them. They are a complete team. I'm not sure you can necessarily call them a Stanley Cup contender, but they're definitely a complete team. Patrice Bergeron's one of the best centers you can have. And then you have Brad Marchand, Scotian boy, and I can't stand the fella, but he is one of the best wingers in the league and one of the best finishers in the league. Then you have some young guys coming up like David Pastrnak, who's an elite superstar in the NHL, and he's, I think he's only 22. It's crazy. Then Jake DeBrusk, another good young forward. And then on D, you have Zdeno Chara, who still has plenty left to give in the tank. Even though he's over 40 now, he's still a very reliable top four. Some would even say top two defenseman still into his 40s. He's an absolute freak. And then you have some of the young defenders coming up who are very, very solid, like Charlie McAvoy, Torrey Krug, Brandon Carlo. So this is a very complete team. And one of the most underrated pickups this summer was John Moore on defense for the Boston Bruins. That was a very good pickup for them. Then in goal, you have Tuukka Rask, still in the prime of his career, and they just picked up Jaro Halak, who Habs fans know a lot about. He can be a very reliable backup for the Bruins. Hate this team. Looking forward to our matchups against them. They're always good games, so hopefully we can come out on top. And now on to the Detroit Red Wings. This is another team I'm not quite really worried about next year. They have some contract issues. They have some players that are quite overpaid right now, which is making it very hard for them to build a team around some of their very good young players. They have Dylan Larkin, Athanasiou on their team, who are very good young players. Nyquist, another one. But with all the contract issues, it's been hard for their management to build around these guys. Their defense could definitely use some work, and their goaltending is always a question mark. They're my pick to finish last in the division. However, they did have a very good draft this year, picking up Filip Zadina from the Halifax Mooseheads. He's going to be an absolute stud for them in the future. Elite goal scorer is likely what he's going to turn out to be. And then they also got from the Halifax Mooseheads Jared McIsaac on defense, as well as already having Marty Firk in their system, who won the Memorial Cup with Drouin McKinnon those few years ago. So that's very exciting for Nova Scotian Detroit Red Wings fans. So as much as I think they're not a good team right now, they could become very good later on. Then you have the Florida Panthers, who I would say is the most underrated team in the Atlantic Division, possibly even the entire NHL. Their top six on offense is absolutely nasty. Alexander Barkov is an absolute beast at center. He is a true #1 center, one of the best defensive centers in the NHL. Plus, he can put up those superstar quality points. He's incredibly skilled. Behind him, you have Vinny Trocheck, who is definitely one of the most underrated players in the entire NHL. He could also be considered a 1C in my eyes. He does it all. He can score. He's a 30-goal scorer. He has vision. He's got skill. He can hit. He wins faceoffs. He does it all. And then on wing, you have Dadonov, Huberdeau, and the new addition of Mike Hoffman. Like I said earlier, the Ottawa Senators sent him to San Jose, and San Jose then sent him to Florida. Ottawa didn't want to have Mike Hoffman in their division, and there's a reason why. And it's because he's a legitimate 30-goal scoring threat every season. I'm glad he's no longer with the Senators, but he is going to be scary with the Florida Panthers, with the centers that he has to work with there. And then on defense, you have Aaron Ekblad, a great goal-scoring defenseman who's also incredible at shutting down top-end quality players. With him, you have Keith Yandle, Mike Matheson, Petrovic. So this is a fairly good defense as well. The question mark for the Florida Panthers is going to be their goaltending with Roberto Luongo. He's getting up there in age, so I'm not quite sure how confident you can be in him anymore as being an elite goalie, but we'll have to wait and see because he does go on stretches where he does seem unbeatable. But all in all, this is a very underrated team. I can see them finishing somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Division next season. Next up, you have the Buffalo Sabres, who I would say are the most improved team in our division heading into next season. One, because they drafted Rasmus Dahlin, who they say is the Connor McDavid of defensemen. He is going to be an absolute stud for them right out of the gate. They've got Jack Eichel as their 1C. They got rid of Ryan O'Reilly, which will be a big loss, but then they have Casey Middlestat, a young center coming up. It may take him some time to adjust to the speed of the NHL, but you never know. He could be one of these young players who comes in straight out of the gate and starts putting up elite numbers. They also made some very serious improvements by picking up Jeff Skinner, and they didn't have to give away a lot of roster talent to bring in Jeff Skinner. So that's a huge addition for them. He is a very good goal scorer in the NHL, capable of scoring up to upwards of 30 to 40 goals. Now, they did trade away Ryan O'Reilly. However, they got some very reliable middle six depth in Patrick Berglund and Vladimir Sobotka for him. So they did get a decent return for Ryan O'Reilly. Maybe not as much as you would think, but in terms of their current roster, what they did get back for him is going to help. So this is a team I see as most improved. I'm very interested to see what they bring to the table next year. I think Buffalo's goaltending situation is what's going to hold them back. They lost Robin Lehner and they brought in Carter Hutton, the St. Louis Blues' backup last season. He'll have to play at an above average rate for them to come anywhere near the playoffs. And now last, you have the Montreal Canadiens. You can check my 2018-19 Montreal Canadiens season preview to get my full thoughts on this team, our favorite team. I do not think they are as bad as people think they will be. There is some question marks on defense, but if Carey Price can play to the elite level that he can, there's going to be a huge jump in the standings for the Habs just right there. But they also have a roster of young players with a ton of potential. So the majority of their core is under 25 years old, and they finished near the top of the league in man games lost to injury last year. So last season, I don't think represents what this team is to the fullest of their capability. Now, they're going to struggle with Shea Weber being out for the first little bit. I think this team has a lot more to give than a basement finish. I can see them finishing somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Division, maybe even snagging a playoff spot. So in closing, I'd like to give you my predictions for the Atlantic Division standings after next season. Who I think is going to finish last is the Detroit Red Wings. I think they just have too many weaknesses and too many older players that are kind of bogging them down right now. They're in the midst of what you could call a rebuild phase. Following them, I see it being the Ottawa Senators. They've lost a lot of players recently, so I think they're going to drop. They finished near the bottom of the standings last year, and their team is not even as good as they were last year. Then I would say you have the Buffalo Sabres. They're going to improve off last season, but I just don't think they're quite ready for a playoff spot yet. Then after that, I'm thinking the Florida Panthers will be right there. And then following them, you'll have the Boston Bruins in the wild card spot, making the playoffs. Then we have the Montreal Canadiens, who I predict to be in third place. Now, that might be a rating that not a lot of people would give the Habs, but I'm quite confident that this is a young team that can show what they're made of next season. That means second place, I have the Toronto Maple Leafs, which means I'm predicting a Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs round 1 playoff series, which would be huge for the NHL and is going to be an incredible rivalry once we get a playoff matchup between these two teams. And I like our chances, to be quite honest, because this is a team that can be beat because they do have weaknesses. And now in first, obviously, I got the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is a very strong team. I have no doubt in my mind they can win the division this year with the stacked offense they have, the deep defense, and one of the best goalies in the league. So that means first Tampa Bay, second Toronto, third Montreal, fourth in the wildcard spot Boston. Then we have Florida, Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit. So that's it. If you like my videos, please subscribe. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Scotian Canadian. Cheers. Go Habs, go.